they're just killing Palestinians like it's a sport, like it's a game. You've dehumanized the Palestinians to the point where it's rather easy to get into a situation where murdering them is acceptable.
So recently, John Mearsheimer went on Katie Halper's podcast to talk a little bit about Benjamin Netanyahu being a total supervillain and the normalization of not only starving Palestinians in Gaza, but also killing them. He also gets into what he thinks the chances are that this slaughter will be ended anytime soon. He's one of the best geopolitical analysts as far as I'm concerned. So let's get his take on this. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
I wish that I had a happy story to tell you. I wish I could say, Katie, listen, I think these two things are going to happen over the course of the next year, and then this situation is going to come to an end. I, to be very honest, find it hard to believe that the genocide in Gaza continues. I just can't believe it, especially now that we have all these pictures of starving children. You just sort of shake your head and say, how can this be? How can people not shut this one down? I mean, it's not like Israel is that powerful vis-a-vis the West and especially the United States. We have tremendous leverage here. You want to remember, as we talked about before, President Trump, the day before he became President Trump, sent Steve Witkoff to the Middle East. This is January 19th to effect a ceasefire, right? Because Trump didn't want what was going on in Gaza to be going on January 20th. So they shut it down. And it looked like there was a pretty good ceasefire agreement that might form the basis of a lasting agreement, or an agreement that would last for maybe a couple years. But that all went up in smoke quite quickly, and here we are. But anyway, I can't. I'm sad to say I can't tell a
Yeah.
happy story.
Well, Brad brought up this, image, speaking of the greater Israel, saying the quiet part out loud. Here's an image of Netanyahu with the new Middle East. It is so much.
Yeah, basically, I agree with Mearsheimer almost completely there, but in a way, I do find it believable why there is this tragedy in Gaza, and it is acceptable despite all the horrors. Don't get me wrong, it's totally horrific and absurd and barbaric what's going on there, but it's the power of the Israel lobby that keeps it going, regardless of who's president. This happened when Biden was president. It happens when Trump is president. And he's right. Trump orchestrated a ceasefire in Gaza that looked promising. It had several phases and involved hostage exchanges, some of which happened, but there's no indication that Netanyahu was ever on board with ever allowing that to flow into a peace agreement. No, he had been intending on violating it from the get-go. We know this from information that's come out since. And despite that, Hamas isn't even really fighting back. Hamas does exist in some capacity still, but this isn't even a war because a war involves two sides fighting. This is a genocide. Hamas isn't even firing rockets into Israel anymore, and it hasn't for about 3 months. So yeah, it's the Israel lobby at play that's keeping this going. Trump's out there boasting about how close he is with Netanyahu and trying to get the Knesset to drop corruption and fraud charges against him, shelving U.S. interests in Iran to come to a diplomatic agreement for the sake of bombing Iran. Now that's off the table. Now Iran has unlimited incentive to actually acquire a nuke. So yeah, Mearsheimer's right, and it looks like this is going to go on indefinitely. It's almost unbelievable if you're looking at this from a moral standpoint, but politically, I hate to say it kind of makes sense, and it's, it keeps me up at night, to be honest, but that's the truth about it.
Much more sinister than that. It is actually luring people to their deaths. I mean, that is one of the things that I can't get out of my mind. I mean, the how diabolical this is, and it's with the help of, US contractors, and they are luring people to their deaths with the promise of food, and as Gabor Mate pointed out, in an interview he did in a forthcoming podcast, this is something that we saw in the Holocaust. Nazis would lure the Jews out of the ghettos, onto the trains towards concentration camps with promises of food.
Well, Norman Finkelstein makes the point, and I know enough that about the Holocaust that I believe he's right. And he, of course, knows more than I do. But his point is that what is quite different between the Holocaust and what the Israelis are doing is that Germans, by and large, did not do it gleefully. They were aware that they should hide what they were doing. In a very important way, they knew they were doing something wrong. Um, those are my words, but there was no real glee here. They felt
Yeah, the Nazis actually did whatever they could to keep this under wraps, too, what they were doing. These were relocation camps to the public. That's what they were sold as, not concentration camps involved in mass killing. And it wasn't even immediately clear to the German people and to the Allies the extent to which this absurd genocide occurred until after the liberation of the concentration camps, in Auschwitz and Birkenau, Dachau, and other camps like that, Treblinka, where this was happening, until we really felt, that the mass catastrophe and destruction and violent genocide that was occurring there. But Katie's right too. The fact that they're luring Palestinians to their deaths, and they are, because we've had, I think, about 1,000 people dead from waiting for food where IDF soldiers kill them because they're drawn out of their hiding locations that they've been forced to go in for almost 2 years now, after the IDF and the Israeli military has shelled the biggest cities in Gaza, including Rafah, which, Minister Katz talks about will be part of a concentration zone soon. So the tactics are alarming, and this is making mainstream headlines in some places. It's being buried in other places, but people are talking about this for the first time, including on the American right, which is a really refreshing dynamic that I haven't seen during my lifetime. So yeah, this is horrific. I can't stop thinking about this like Katie, the fact that they're being lured to their deaths after successfully making it out of the worst attacks by Israel, only to die at the hands of the IDF. And by the way, the Israeli government hasn't even denied that that's happened. That has happened.
like they just had a job to do.
Right.
And I'm not justifying what they
No,
did.
right.
But in the case of the Israelis, there are just all sorts of videos that are shocking because you see that they're just killing Palestinians like it's a sport, like it's a game. They're having fun. It's just hard to believe what's going on. Uh, but just back to Cindy McCain. My question is, why aren't there more people like Cindy McCain? This is what I don't understand for the life of me. You know,
And to be clear, he's referencing a video that Cindy McCain recently took about aid effort and how it's been completely disastrous because some of the things they're talking about. And Cindy McCain was married to, one of the biggest Zionist war criminals in my mind in U.S. history. John McCain never knew a war he didn't want to support and a cause that supported Israel that he didn't want to support. And I use support loosely. He wanted to support their government at the, cost of the citizens of Israel, which are suffering too under this calamity. Netanyahu is a supervillain, and there are dissidents within Israel too, and that's not brought up very much, but he's right. But I would say that there are some figures on the right, especially the dissident right, that are having a different perspective on Israel than I've ever seen. It's not just Pat Buchanan and Ron Paul anymore. You're seeing their top brass on that side, and by top brass I mean big influencers like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens bring this up. Even Matt Walsh has raised questions about support to Israel. So that's what we're seeing, and I think the dynamic's shifting despite the fact that, not enough people are standing up to this.
this is the year 2025. Uh, Given where we are, you would not expect uh, that the body politic in the West or the various body politics in Western countries would allow this to go on. It's so shocking.
Yeah.
I can't figure it out. What's going on here?
Well, deep down inside, he has figured it out more so than basically anyone else out there, actually. He wrote the book on the Israel lobby. He knows the influence they have in the United States, and it's hold over the U.S. president that Donald Trump, in his first term, he moved the embassy to Jerusalem, a move that was certainly against the two-party state solution. He signed the Abraham Accords, which rose tensions with other areas within kind of that region that also kind of benefited Israel. He brags about how much support he gave to Miriam Adelson and Sheldon Adelson for Israel and causes related to Israel. And he bombed Yemen because the Houthis were providing aid to the Palestinians. He bombed them for about a month. And he shelved U.S. diplomacy with Iran for the sake of a war against Iran, where regime change was on the table, and I think it would have been if Iranians didn't exercise restraint in their reprisal. So I think Mearsheimer actually does understand. It's just so horrific. That's what I'm kind of interpreting this as.
How could Joe Biden and Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan allow this to go on? These are people who view themselves as liberal Democrats,
Right.
believe in human rights. How could they do this? Uh, Even Donald
He
Trump.
knows.
Okay, Donald Trump's not a liberal Democrat, but doesn't his sense of decency just tell him that you can't do this?
What sense of decency? Is there a sense of decency? I don't see it in terms of Trump when it comes to foreign policy, that's for sure. And Mearsheimer should know that too.
Uh, but anyway, the number of people who are speaking out uh, down below is very great.
Right.
You and I are two examples of that. But the number of people in the upper echelons who are speaking out and doing something about this is remarkably small. And I honestly don't understand it at all.
Yeah, he's right. Very few people do speak up out about it in the mainstream again, but then we have TikTok where it's unavoidable that this is happening. I mean, this has been shoved in the faces of Americans, and by the way, that's why they wanted TikTok banned and why they might ultimately succeed in banning TikTok. It's the alternative media, it's the independent media that is bringing these news stories to the forefront, where in the past, under legacy media monopoly and legacy media domination, they would have put up a wall against this so Americans could never see this. We'd never know about the atrocities. We'd never know the names. They'd just be numbers. And that's all that Americans would deal with. But it's impossible to ignore this now. And more Americans, I think, are waking up to that.
I just find it hard to believe that people haven't shut this one down.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is unbelievable, and it's painful to think about. And I mean, just this slow motion killing of children. I mean, because they're the ones who are most vulnerable to starvation. And it just is like, what was the point of never again? What was the point of all these lessons that we subject children to if it's just going to be applied again, just to a different population, which coincidentally had nothing to do with the Holocaust? I mean, be one thing if this were being done to Germans, not all Germans, John, of course. But it would be one thing if this were being done to Germans, which I would oppose, but there would be a coherence to it, right? But doing it to Palestinians who had absolutely nothing to do with this is just it's absolutely it's stunning. And as you referred to, and Norman Finkelstein has referred to this, it's kind of like the opposite of the banality of evil that Arendt talks about.
Yeah.
It's like the gleeful execution of evil.
Exactly. That I like that language. It's not the banality of evil. And again, that's, as you well know, not to justify anything that
Oh,
you're.
no, not at all, right. It's just a different shade of it. I mean, it's like but it is the opposite. It's not the mechanization and the depersonalization of it and the distance from it. It's the glee and the, documentation.
But if you think about the creation of Israel, going back to what we were talking about before, there were hardly any Jews in what was Palestine around 1900. And those Jews who were in Palestine were not Zionists.
Right.
And when the Zionists came, and this gets back to your comments about Jabotinsky, they understood full well they were going to have to do horrible things to the
Right.
Palestinians.
This is true. That's why terrorism rose up in Zionist ranks, and that happened before Islamic terrorism in Israel. That's for sure. That's part of the historical record. And if you don't believe me, read up on the Stern Gang. But he's right. Much of early Zionism was related to European interests and European Jews coming down into the region and setting, this scheme in place. And it ended up being a massive land redistribution scheme, culminating in a globalist referendum, or I should say resolution within the UN to create the modern state of Israel. And that just separated in an instantaneously Palestinians from their property, and they were just supposed to give up much of their property. That created the war, the first war fought there, which the Palestinians didn't win. And ever since, they've been a subjugated people. Now, there's been ebbs and flows. After 67, they certainly were an occupied people when Gaza was occupied. And, ever since, there's been, so many different waves of persecution, including the ones that still stand now, the blockade, not allowing certain goods and services into Palestine to keep the livelihoods of the people there. And I mean, that's just the smallest end of it now that there's literally a genocide there. But Israel occupied that region for something like 40 years after 67. So that's where we're at. And I don't know that, we're going against it anytime soon, at least from the U.S. perspective, when the Israel lobby reigns supreme and all the rage is Israel first at any cost.
There's just no way you create a Jewish state in a sea of Palestinians without doing horrible things to the Palestinians. And this has gone on and on and on for many, many decades, for well over a century now.
Right.
And in the process, you've dehumanized the Palestinians to the point where it's rather easy to get into a situation where murdering them is acceptable.
And that's true. That's exactly what a lot of Zionists have done, and the administration of Netanyahu has done, himself a supervillain, selling this, doubling down on this, locking arms with Trump to do this, with the U.S. bankrolling it, the U.S. sending $20 billion to Israel last year and many more this year. Before that, it was $4 billion a year. And that map of Greater Israel just says it all. And that doesn't even include things that they also have laid claim to after that. If you look back at that map earlier in the video, you can see that it doesn't include the West Bank settlement expansion that they're trying to do in parts of Syria, where they've occupied the southwestern part of Syria after that regime change went into effect at the end of last year, replacing a secular Alawite with a literal former Al-Qaeda fighter that fought U.S. forces in Syria. Jelani now calls himself El Shara, who Trump said, hey, he has a strong past. Well, either Trump was totally ignorant, or the strong past he was referring to is the fact that he fought U.S. soldiers. He was what the U.S. empire called a terrorist back then. That's exactly what, they deemed him. And this was only 10 years after 9/11 that the U.S. started pouring in aid to Syria to rebel groups, including Al-Qaeda and ISIS, as part of USAID. USAID gave them $15 billion. As always, USAID served as the financial wing of the CIA's regime change program. And it gets worse than that. It's raised antagonism between the United States and Gaddafi and Libya. Has the U.S.-Israeli relationship? It's raised tensions with Iran. We've seen that on display recently, and that conflict isn't over. There's only a ceasefire. And hey, it's been my entire lifetime that Netanyahu essentially has said, hey, they're weeks, days, seconds, milliseconds away from acquiring a nuke. You're going to hear that from the neocons and Zionists again. So yeah, it's utter depravity, but there are reasons for it. And I hate to put it in these terms, but it's because of the lobby. The Israel lobby outweighs all utilitarian and moral inclinations to believe that this is just a complete slaughter. It's complete devastation. There's no way to justify this in any way imaginable. And we're seeing it play out regardless of what administration is currently in power because of that. And both these two know that. I mean, both Katie and John are just geniuses when it comes to these types of situations and these kind of dynamics, but it doesn't make it easier to swallow for us on the outside that look at these things and just kind of find them completely despicable and impossible to justify under any regards imaginable. But that's where we're at. But I do want to hear from what you guys think about it. Let me know in the comments below. Do you agree with John Mearsheimer that Benjamin Netanyahu's a supervillain and this is just totally ghastly? Do you see any off-ramps to the genocide in Gaza at any time soon? Because I don't really do it unless it's on Netanyahu's terms, and those aren't terms that I'm going to like. But let me know down below on that. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Also subscribe to Katie. Her show's awesome. I really appreciate her coverage on stories like this. And please consider becoming a YouTube member by clicking the join button below. You'll help support my channel, which I'll really appreciate. And in return for that, your good deed, I'll give you access to all of my videos before they come out on YouTube to the general public. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.